الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. So obviously we have been watching the news and we're following what is happening in Palestine, and so for that reason the ANIC, the Australian National Imam Council, has recommended that we educate ourselves on the history of the oppression of the Palestinians. You know, because the Palestinians have been oppressed since 1947 by the Zionists and their illegal state and their illegal occupation. So let's talk about how the Zionist state was created. Now, there's an important event in history called the Balfour Declaration. What is the Balfour Declaration? This actually, it was a declaration that occurred, it was signed 107 years ago. It was in the year 1917. So we need to understand that, what were the driving forces behind the creation of the illegal state of Israel. So this declaration was signed in the first week of November in 1917, and it was signed by the Foreign Secretary of England, of UK, United Kingdom, called, his name was Arthur Balfour. So what happened was the government of the United Kingdom, they signed this declaration in which they noted that we express interest in the formation of a home for the Jewish people. A home, not a nation, because if they wrote nation in the declaration, that we want to form a nation for the Jewish people, then many people would have been against it. So they said we want to create a home for the Jewish people. Obviously, this home would be in the Palestinian land, would be in the land of Palestine. So obviously in the 1900s, like just at the turn of the century, Palestine was only inhabited by Jews to the extent of 3%. 3% of the land was inhabited by Jews. The rest of the people were Muslim and Christian. There was a minority of Christians living in Palestinian land. Why? Because all the way back during the Crusades in the medieval times, Salahuddin Ayyubi, rahmatullahi alayhi, when he conquered the Crusaders and defeated them, he allowed some Christians to stay in the land of Palestine, and even the 3% Jews that were living in Palestine during the 1900s, those Jews were actually Arab Jews. So they spoke Arabic, and so they were Arab Jews, not European Jews. Like these days, you can see that, almost, 95 to 98% of the Jews that live in Israel, unfortunately, their ancestry traces back to Europe. They were they're European Jews. So what happened was, obviously, Palestine at the time was owned by the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire, they owned Palestine and they ruled Palestine. We all know about Sultan Abdul Hamid. Many times the British and the other countries, they tried to make him give up Palestine and give up control of the Palestinian land. Now, this was at a time, by the way, in the late 19th century. Ottoman Empire was on the downfall. They were actually losing a lot of power and influence. Furthermore, they were deep in debt. They had a huge, huge debt. And the British actually offered Sultan Abdul Hamid that we will pay off all your debts. Okay, we'll pay off all the debts of the Ottoman Empire. All you have to do is give us Palestine. Give us Palestine, sell it to us, and then we'll pay off all your debts. But Sultan Abdul Hamid was such an honest man. He said that no, even if you give me, the whole world and all its treasures, I will not sell even one square meter of this land. Even that this land belongs to the Palestinians. This is our land, sacred, holy land, the land of Masjid al-Aqsa. We will not sell even one portion of this land to the British. So now the British were stuck. Like, how do we create this land? So the Balfour Declaration was such a declaration in which By the way, there was so Arthur Balfour, he actually was the Prime Minister of England in about 1905. He was the Prime Minister of England, UK, in 1905. And what happened was, during that time, has anyone heard of Lawrence of Arabia? Lawrence of Arabia was a British spy that was sent to Saudi Arabia, to the Sharif of Makkah. The Sharif of Makkah, Lawrence of Arabia went to him to try to convince him to give up, not give up, but betray the Ottomans. That Lawrence of Arabia from the UK, he came to the Sharif of Makkah and told him, give up or betray the Ottoman Empire, and if you betray the Ottomans, we will give you such a kingdom that will span from Yemen until Baghdad. We'll give you a huge khilafat. The khilafat will come back to the Saudis, to the Arabs. And so the Arabs were very persuaded by this, that we want the khilafat not to stay with the Turks, the Turkish people, but we want the khilafat to come back to us. That we want to be the rulers of the Islamic Empire, just like the Umayyads, the Abbasids. Back in the day, the Arabs were the rulers of the Islamic Empire. Obviously, eventually, the power fell on the Ottomans. So the Sharif of Makkah, by the way, he was an Alawi. He was a descendant of Ali radiallahu anhu. So he came from a very noble lineage. So obviously, he had a lot of influence, a lot of power. So he actually agreed with Lawrence of Arabia in 1905 that we will betray the Ottomans, and all you have to do is give us our khilafat. Take the khilafat away from the Ottomans. Obviously, World War I was spent fighting. There was the Allied forces, the British, the French, the Russians. They were fighting against Germany. They were fighting against also the Ottomans. Like we celebrate Anzac Day in this country. Everyone knows about Anzac Day. Unfortunately, Anzac Day was a day in which the Australians, the Anzacs, the Australians and the New Zealand forces, they actually fought in Gallipoli. Gallipoli is a place in Turkey, and they actually fought against the Ottomans. And sorry to say, a lot of people, they try to erase or forget history. Actually, the Ottomans won the battle at Gallipoli, but eventually they lost the war. Winning the battle, losing the war. In any case, what happened was the Sharif of Makkah, he actually thought that Sham, the Bilad al-Sham, which is Lebanon, Palestine, he thought that would be under his control. But what the British did, they actually betrayed the Saudis. They had another secret agreement with France and Russia that we will destroy the Ottomans, and then we will split Middle East between ourselves. The French, the Russians, and the British, we will split the Middle East amongst ourselves. We will not give any of that land to the Saudis, to the Arabs. They will not be able to rule, as I mentioned, from Yemen to Baghdad. They were promised a khilafah, a kingdom for the Muslims. They actually, the British actually betrayed the Saudis, and what happened was they had a secret pact with the Russians and the French. Now here's the other thing. The British, so they betrayed the Saudis, they also betrayed the French and the Russians. By the way, the Russians were on the side of United Kingdom in World War I. That would obviously change in World War II, and they switched sides and they became the enemy. But the Russians were actually on the side of the Allied forces. Who wasn't on the side of the Allied forces in World War I? It was the Americans. The Americans, they wanted to have nothing to do with the war, and they were neutral. Throughout the World War I, they were neutral, and America was not a superpower at the time. British was the superpower of the world. This eventually switched in World War II. America eventually, obviously the British went down after World War I. Their power went down, and then the Americans, they became the superpower of the world. And according to the majority, they're still a superpower. even now, even as we speak. So in any case, the British, as I mentioned, they betrayed the Saudis. Lawrence of Arabia, he was a British spy. He betrayed the Saudis after convincing them to betray the Ottomans, and then he also betrayed the United Kingdom. They betrayed France and Russia. So they actually had a separate dealing. Now, in the Zionist movement, it was only a very recent movement that came out in the 1890s. They had plans to set up Jewish homeland, Zionist homeland in many different countries. At one point, they wanted to set up a homeland in Uganda in Africa, and at another point, even in Argentina. And then they had another plan, very interesting, in the Kimberley region in Western Australia. So it's like the northern, if you go east of Broome, there's it's all desert. They actually wanted to set up a region in the Jewish homeland in the Kimberley region. But all these plans, they never came into fruition. They eventually settled that, no, we want to, our ancestors, they used to reside in Sham, so we want to set up our homeland in Sham, where the Palestinians already are. And so what happened was, in the 1890s, Theodore Herzl, he was the president of the Zionist Confederation. He held a conference in Switzerland, announcing his interest to create a Jewish homeland for the Jewish people. But actually what happened in the 1890s, most Jewish people, they actually rejected this notion. Because the Jews, they were living comfortably in Europe, they were not being oppressed. The Nazi Party only came to power in the 1930s. So the Jewish people, they were living comfortably in Europe. They had no interest in setting up a Jewish homeland. This interest in setting up a Jewish homeland, it was only accepted by a few secular politicians. Zionists, traditionally, they were secular Jews. So in any case, what happened was, through political influences in the United Kingdom, Arthur Balfour, as I said, he was the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. He agreed to allow the Balfour Declaration to be signed, which again, as I mentioned, the Balfour Declaration expressed interest in creating a Jewish homeland. What happened was, he was Prime Minister in the early 1900s, like in 1905. He was the one who sent Lawrence of Arabia to spy and convince the Sharif of Makkah to give up and betray the Ottomans. And then in 1917, at the time of the signing of the declaration, it was the time of World War I. World War I was, in full effect, and the war was in, basically combat and bombing. It was in full effect during 1917. Him and war committee, they had a British war committee, they signed the declaration. After the signing of the declaration, Jewish immigration to Palestine, it increased. And at the time it was only 3% Jewish people in Palestine. It became 30%, and Jewish people were migrating in such huge numbers that basically the British had to put a quota to Jewish migration to Palestine. So, and then when the Jewish people, they saw that the UK and their policies were preventing Jewish immigration to Palestine, what they did, the Zionists, they actually eventually became terrorists. They actually started killing the British that were in Palestine. They killed the British that were in Palestine. There was a famous bombing in King David Hotel. King David Hotel in Palestine. What happened was the Jewish Zionists, the terrorists, they bombed that hotel. Over 100 British people and their army personnel died in that bombing, and then they eventually fled back to the UK. They actually just said, no, we don't want to be involved in this. Jewish numbers had grown so significantly after the Balfour Declaration that let the League of Nations and the United Nations, let them decide who will take over Palestine after we're gone. At the time there was a British mandate on Palestine, so eventually the League of Nations, they handed over Palestine to the Zionists, and that's how the Zionist nation was created, and that's when the United Nations, through lobbying of the American politicians, 52 or 53% of the land was given to the Zionists, and only 47 to 48% of the land was given to the Palestinians, the traditional owners of the land. But what happened was the Zionists, they didn't have enough. They eventually went to Palestinian villages. They they ransacked, they raided Palestinian villages, kicked the Palestinians out. What happened was 750,000 people were displaced during the Nakbah. This was a huge atrocity, and the Palestinians, they're still displaced to this land, displaced from this land to this day. What the Zionists did, all the arable land meaning land where you can do agriculture, land that's fertile, they took it for themselves and gave the Palestinians all the land that was infertile and very harsh conditions. And these atrocities, they still stand today. What I recommend to the Muslims, we know now the history of, obviously the Saudis had something to do with the creation of Israel. Unfortunately, when they betrayed the Ottomans, we know that the British, they signed the declaration in 1917. We know that they gave the land. They didn't give the land, but they caused immigration, Jewish immigration into the land of Palestine, which caused Zionist terrorism, which also led to the British leaving Palestine, and then the United Nations creating the state, or voting to create the state of Israel. So what we can do as Muslims, never ever stop talking about Palestine, never ever stop vocalizing our support for Palestine. Some say that protests don't work. We see that, worldwide there's a protest from young people, not just people from the older generation, my father's generation, not even from my generation, people who are after my generation. They've been protesting, they've been voicing their support for the people of Gaza. So let's never ever stop talking about Gaza. Let's never ever stop voicing our support for Palestine. Inshallah, our voices will be heard, our du'as will be heard. Let's constantly make dua for our brothers and sisters in Gaza, and let us never forget that Allah inna nasrullahi qareeb, that alas, the help of Allah is close. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
الحمد لله الذي له ما في السماوات وما في الأرض وله الحمد في الآخرة وهو الحكيم الخبير يعلم ما يلج في الأرض وما يخرج منها وما ينزل من السماء وما يعرج فيها وهو الحكيم الخبير ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له في الخلق والأمر ونشهد أن سيدنا وسندنا وحبيبنا وشفيعنا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله هو الذي قال الله تعالى عنه وما ينطق عن الهوى إن هو إلا وحي يوحى وصلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد، فيا معشر المسلمين، اعلم أن الإسلام بني على الخمس: شهادة أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمدا عبده ورسوله، وإقامة الصلاة، وإيتاء الزكاة، وصوم رمضان، وحج البيت من استطاع إليه سبيلا. فقد قال الله تعالى في القرآن العظيم بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم: وأقيموا الصلاة وآتوا الزكاة واركعوا مع الراكعين. صدق الله العلي العظيم. ويا معشر المسلمين، عليكم هذه الملاحظة العظيمة: فإن خير الحديث كتاب الله، وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم، وإن خير الأمور عوازمها، وشر الأمور محدثاتها، فكل محدثة بدعة، وكل بدعة ضلالة، وكل ضلالة في النار. فقد قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم: من حسن إسلام المرء تركه ما لا يعنيه. وقال عليه الصلاة والسلام: المسلم من سلم المسلمون من لسانه ويده، أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. بارك الله لنا ولكم في القرآن العظيم، ونفعنا وإياكم بالآيات والذكر الحكيم، إنه تعالى جواد كريم ملك بر رؤوف رحيم. الحمد لله نستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه، ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له، ومن يضلله فلا هادي له. ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، ونشهد أن سيدنا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله، أرسله بالحق بشيرا ونذيرا بين يدي الساعة. فمن يطع الله ورسوله فقد رشد واهتدى، ومن يعصهما فإنه لا يضر إلا نفسه ولا يضر الله شيئا. فقد قال الله تعالى في القرآن العظيم بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم: إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد عبدك ورسولك، وصل على المؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات، وبارك على محمد وأزواجه وذريته. اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين ودمر أعداءك أعداء الدين، وانصر عبادك الموحدين، واجعل اللهم البلاد الإسلام آمنة مطمئنة يا رب العالمين. اللهم حرر المسجد الأقصى من اليهود الغاصبين. اللهم زلزلهم ودمرهم ولا ترفع لهم راية. اللهم إنا نجعلك في نحورهم ونعوذ بك من شرورهم. اللهم إنا نجعلك في نحورهم ونعوذ بك من شرورهم. اللهم انصر المسلمين في فلسطين. اللهم انصر المجاهدين في كل مكان. اللهم انصر من نصر دين محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم واجعلنا منهم، واخذل من خذل دين محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم ولا تجعلنا منهم. أنت المستعان وعليك البلاغ، ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. وصلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. عباد الله رحمكم الله، إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي، يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. فاذكروني أذكركم واشكروا لي ولا تكفرون. ولذكر الله تعالى أولى وأعلى وأهم وأتم وأجل وأكبر، والله يعلم ما تصنعون. قوموا إلى صلاتكم يرحمني ويرحمكم الله. Straighten your lines. Mobile phones on silent, inshallah.
الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. حي على الصلاة، حي على الفلاح، قد قامت الصلاة، قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
دائما أبدا لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله. سووا صفوفكم، سووا ولا تختلفوا. Allahu Akbar. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين.